The grandfather clock chimed 2 in the morning within the silent library of Blackwood House, but Arthur, the Duke of Blackwood, had no intention of retiring to bed. With an untouched glass of whiskey in his hand, he stared into the hearth's dying flames whilst a fine rain lashed against the window panes. The quiet of the room was broken only by the sound of hurried footsteps before the double doors opened. "I have the confirmation your grace requested," announced Thomas, his secretary and most trusted confidant, stepping in with a sealed envelope in his hands. The man's expression was cautious. "The announcement shall be printed in the morning papers. Lord Harrington is officially engaged." The Duke turned slowly, his dark eyes gleaming with a coldness that made even the oldest servants of the house step back. Harrington, the very man who, 5 years ago, had betrayed his family's trust, ruined his late father's finances, and sullied the Blackwood name with ruthless lies. Arthur had spent years rebuilding his fortune and his reputation, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to return the favor. "Who is the unfortunate creature?" the Duke asked, his voice a low, dangerous murmur, taking the parchment from Thomas's hands. "Her name is Miss Clara Vance, your grace, eldest daughter of Viscount Vance. Her family is on the brink of ruin due to the Viscount's gambling debts. The marriage to Harrington is, undoubtedly, a financial transaction. He secures a respectable, ancient title to associate with, and the Vances have their creditors paid." Arthur broke the wax seal and scanned the formal lines of the announcement. A cruel smile, entirely devoid of warmth, curved his lips. Harrington was a man driven by pride and possession. Stripping him of his wealth would not suffice. Harrington needed to be humiliated before the entirety of London's high society, just as he had done to the Duke's family. "Harrington believes he has bought a wife to adorn his drawing room and cleanse his image," the Duke whispered, crushing the paper in his fist. "But he shall never make it to the altar." "What do you intend to do, your grace?" Thomas asked, a note of apprehension in his voice. "I shall befriend Miss Vance. I will charm her, compel her to break the engagement, and have her beg for my attentions, only to discard her when Harrington becomes the laughing stock of the ton. Ready my carriage for tomorrow evening's ball, Thomas. The game has finally begun." The Countess of Pembroke's ballroom was stiflingly warm, illuminated by hundreds of candles in crystal chandeliers, and thoroughly crowded with the elite of the ton. The sweeping sound of violins mingled with the hum of hushed gossip and polite laughter. When Arthur was announced at the grand double doors, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. It was a rare occurrence for the Duke of Blackwood to attend such frivolous events, and his imposing presence immediately drew the curious, hungry gazes of matchmaking mamas and fawning noblemen alike. Ignoring the exaggerated bows and the whispers, the Duke swept the room with a predatory gaze. It did not take him long to find his quarry. On the opposite side of the dance floor, wearing an impeccably tailored evening coat and sporting a smug smile, stood Lord Harrington. Arthur felt his blood boil with hatred, yet he maintained an icy, flawless demeanor. His gaze slid from Harrington to the woman standing at his side. He had expected to see a foolish girl, dazzled by the heavy jewelry her fiancé had surely purchased for her, giggling emptily to secure her future. However, what he found caught him entirely off guard. Clara Vance wore no extravagant silks. Her gown was of a muted, dark blue, quite clearly altered from past seasons, and the only jewelry she wore was a simple cameo at her throat. But it was not the absence of wealth that arrested the Duke's attention. It was the young woman's bearing. She was not smiling. Whilst Harrington prattled on to a group of potential investors, Clara surveyed the ballroom with an analytical, deeply bored gaze. When a drunken young gentleman stumbled near her, she did not let out a frightened squeak as other ladies might. She merely took an agile step backwards, her expression flickering with mild distaste and weariness. She looked like a prisoner, counting the minutes until her release, rather than a besotted bride-to-be. Arthur concealed himself in the shadows, near a marble pillar, studying her every movement. She was not conventionally dazzling, but there was a quiet, unyielding strength in the tilt of her chin, and a sharp intelligence in her brown eyes that intrigued him. A victim of a foolish father and an arrogant fiancé, the Duke thought. For a fleeting instant, a pang of pity threatened his iron resolve, but he swiftly crushed it. War allowed for no innocent casualties, and Clara Vance was merely a pawn on his chessboard. Straightening his pristine white cuffs, the Duke took his first step into the light, walking slowly along the perimeter of the ballroom. It was time to introduce himself to his enemy's bride. 2 days later, the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Hyde Park, where the ton had gathered for the customary promenade. Arthur rode his black stallion at a leisurely pace along Rotten Row, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of parasols and top hats. He soon spotted her. Miss Clara Vance was seated on a wrought-iron bench near the Serpentine, looking thoroughly unamused. Her chaperone, an elderly aunt who appeared to be dozing, sat beside her. Lord Harrington was entirely absent, likely off currying favor with some influential peer. It was the perfect opening. Arthur gracefully dismounted, handed the reins to a passing groom with a tossed coin, and approached the bench. He arranged his features into a mask of devastating, practiced charm, the very look that had broken a dozen hearts across London. A veritable tragedy, if I may be so bold, the Duke murmured as he stopped before her, casting a shadow over her lap. Clara looked up, squinting slightly against the sunlight. Recognition flared in her brown eyes, followed by a guarded neutrality. She offered a precise, shallow nod. "Your Grace, to what tragedy do you refer? Has the Prince Regent chosen the wrong waistcoat again?" Arthur's lips twitched. He had not expected dry wit. "I refer to the tragedy of seeing a lady of your countenance left entirely unattended in such a crowded park. Harrington is a fool to let you out of his sight." He waited for the blush, the flutter of eyelashes, or the nervous giggle that usually followed his compliments. Instead, Clara merely raised an eyebrow. "Lord Harrington is speaking with Lord Liverpool's secretary near the gates. And as for being unattended, Your Grace, I assure you, this bench and my aunt's light snoring provide the most peace I have enjoyed all week." "Then I apologize for interrupting your solitude," Arthur replied smoothly, taking a seat beside her without asking permission. "I confess, I saw you at the Countess of Pembroke's ball and found myself intensely curious. You do not seem to share the excitement of the other debutantes regarding your impending nuptials." Clara stiffened, her posture turning rigid. "My excitement, or lack thereof, is hardly a matter for public discourse, Your Grace. Especially not with a stranger, no matter how elevated his title." Arthur leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, seductive register. "Perhaps I do not wish to remain a stranger, Miss Vance." She turned her head to look at him directly. Her gaze was piercing, entirely devoid of the swooning admiration he was accustomed to. "I am engaged, Your Grace, and I suspect a man of your standing does not converse with impoverished viscounts' daughters merely out of idleness. I do not know what game you are playing, but I assure you, I have neither the time nor the inclination to participate." Before Arthur could counter her stunningly sharp rebuff, a loud crack of thunder echoed across the park, snapping the tranquil afternoon in two. The sky darkened with unnatural speed, and a heavy, sudden summer downpour descended upon the park. Panic erupted among the promenaders. Carriages scrambled, and ladies shrieked as their silk gowns were soaked. Clara's aunt awoke with a start, and was immediately swept away by a throng of frantic dowagers rushing towards the gates. "Come with me!" Arthur shouted over the din of the rain, abandoning all propriety as he grasped Clara's gloved hand. He pulled her across the wet grass, sprinting towards a small, stone neoclassical folly, half hidden by a grove of oak trees. They burst beneath the domed roof, breathless and dripping. Clara leaned against a stone pillar, chest heaving. Her modest bonnet was completely ruined, the brim sagging miserably over her forehead. Arthur waited for the inevitable tears or complaints about her ruined gown. Instead, a startling sound filled the small pavilion. She was laughing. It was a breathless, bitter sound that held no genuine mirth. "Perfect," she muttered, pulling the sodden bonnet from her head and tossing it onto a dry stone bench. A ruined hat to perfectly match a ruined life. The heavens possess an excellent sense of irony. Arthur stepped closer, genuinely taken aback. The rain had washed away the strict, polite facade she wore for society. "You speak rather bleakly for a woman about to secure her future." Clara turned to him, her damp hair clinging to her cheeks. The storm seemed to have unleashed something feral and desperate within her. "Secure my future? Is that what the Tun calls it? You are a duke, your grace. You possess wealth, power, and the supreme luxury of choice. You cannot possibly understand." "Enlighten me then," Arthur said softly, all traces of his predatory charm vanishing. "I am not marrying Harrington because I wish to," she spat, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I am marrying him because my father wagered away my dowry, our estate, and my 2 younger sisters' futures at the card tables. Harrington is not purchasing a wife. He is buying an ancient pedigree to mask his own sordid reputation. And I am the price of my family's survival." Arthur felt as though he had been struck. "You do not care for him at all." "I despise him," Clara confessed, a tear mingling with the raindrops on her face. "He is vain, cruel, and thoroughly controlling. But I will walk down that aisle, your grace, and I will smile, because the alternative is seeing my sisters thrown into the street." She looked away, wiping her cheek fiercely. In that fraction of a second, the Duke of Blackwood's meticulously crafted plan of vengeance shattered into 1,000 pieces. He stared at the brave, fiercely intelligent woman before him, realizing with a sickening jolt that she was not an extension of his enemy. She was Harrington's victim, just as the Blackwoods had been. The dark, twisting knot of revenge in Arthur's chest was suddenly replaced by a terrifying, unfamiliar urge, the overwhelming instinct to protect her. The fire in the Duke's study roared, casting flickering shadows against the dark mahogany walls of Blackwood House. But it offered no warmth to the chill settling in Arthur's bones. He paced the length of the Persian rug, his cravat discarded and his white linen shirt open at the collar. It had been 24 hours since the thunderstorm in the park, and Clara Vance's desperate, tear-streaked face haunted his every waking thought. Thomas stood quietly by the door, a ledger in his hands, watching his employer with growing concern. The Duke had not slept, nor had he touched the tray of food left upon his desk. "You wish to review the strategy regarding Lord Harrington's investments, Your Grace," Thomas ventured carefully. "If we pull our covert funding from his shipping ventures this week, combined with your public seduction of his bride, his ruin will be absolute by Friday." Arthur halted by the window, staring out at the mist creeping over the London streets. He gripped the heavy velvet curtain until his knuckles turned white. "We are halting the plan, Thomas," Arthur said, his voice raspy and exhausted. The secretary blinked, entirely taken aback. "I beg your pardon? Have you decided to spare Harrington?" "Damn Harrington to hell," Arthur snarled, spinning around. The sudden ferocity in his eyes was startling. "I care not for his shipping ventures or his hollow pride, but I will not use Miss Vance to break him. I cannot." He walked over to his desk, leaning heavily against the polished wood. The realization tasted bitter on his tongue. He had spent 5 years viewing himself as an instrument of righteous justice, only to discover he had been mere steps away from becoming the very monster he despised. He had planned to shatter a woman who was already fighting desperately to keep her family from drowning. She is not a willing participant in his social climbing, Thomas. She is his captive. Harrington holds her father's gambling debts like a blade to her throat. If I ruin her reputation to strike at him, I condemn her sisters to the gutter. I will not allow it. Then what is our course of action, Your Grace? Arthur's jaw tightened with renewed, fierce determination. The predator had vanished. The protector had awakened. Gather every piece of information you can on Viscount Vance's debts. Find out exactly who holds his promissory notes. I do not care what it costs. Buy the debt. Find a loophole in the marriage settlements. I am going to tear Clara Vance from Harrington's grasp, and I am going to do it before he can drag her to the altar. The grand gallery of Somerset House was crowded with the ton admiring the Royal Academy's summer exhibition. Clara stood slightly apart from the throng, her eyes fixed upon a dramatic oil painting of a storm-tossed ship. She wore a simple lavender walking dress, her hands clasped tightly before her. I find it rather unsettling how perfectly the artist captured the feeling of being entirely at the mercy of the elements. A deep, familiar voice murmured beside her. Clara turned to find the Duke of Blackwood. This time, there was no mocking smirk, no practiced seductive tilt to his head. He looked at her with an earnest, stripping intensity that made her breath catch. "It is honest, at least," Clara replied softly, deciding not to flee. Since the pavilion, she felt a strange, unspoken tether between them. The sea makes no false promises. Unlike men, Arthur agreed, stepping closer. The faint scent of bergamot and crisp linen surrounded her. "Miss Vance, about what you confessed during the storm, I wish to help you." Before Clara could process the astonishing sincerity in his offer, a cold, sharp voice sliced through the air between them. "My dear Clara, I explicitly instructed you not to wander from your aunt." Lord Harrington appeared from behind a marble bust, his smile thin and his eyes entirely devoid of warmth. He reached out, his fingers wrapping around Clara's upper arm. His grip was entirely polite to the untrained eye, but Clara flinched slightly as his fingers dug punishingly into her flesh. Arthur saw the flinch. Every muscle in the Duke's large frame tensed, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "Blackwood," Harrington drawled, his gaze sliding to the Duke with venomous triumph. "I see you have met my fiancé. I must ask you to excuse us. Clara is quite fragile and tires easily of imposing company." "I was not aware standing before a canvas required such extraordinary stamina, Harrington," Arthur replied, his voice a lethal silken whisper. His dark eyes locked onto Harrington's hand, still bruising Clara's arm, "though I suppose keeping terrible company is exhausting in its own right." Harrington's sneer faltered, a flash of genuine hatred crossing his features. "You have always suffered from an overinflated sense of your own wit, Arthur. I suggest you keep your distance. What is mine remains mine. I do not tolerate trespassers, in business or in my household." Clara looked between the two men, the air around them suddenly thick with a dangerous electric history she did not understand. Harrington was practically vibrating with malicious insecurity, whilst the Duke radiated a quiet, terrifying violence. "Let her arm go, Harrington," Arthur said softly, ignoring the threat completely. "Before I break your fingers here in front of the portrait of the king." Harrington hesitated, intimidated despite himself, and slowly released her arm. With a final, furious glare at Arthur, he forcefully guided Clara away. As she was led into the crowd, Clara looked back over her shoulder. The Duke of Blackwood was still standing there, watching her, a silent vow burning in his eyes. The air in the conservatory at the Duchess of Richmond's ball was heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine, but Clara found it difficult to breathe. She stood frozen beside a marble fountain, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs as Lord Harrington's cruel, mocking words echoed in the damp air. "Did you truly believe the great Duke of Blackwood looked upon you with genuine affection, my dear?" Harrington had whispered, his fingers viciously tight around his champagne flute. "You are nothing but a pawn in a very old game. 5 years ago, I ruined his father's investments." Arthur swore vengeance. "His sudden interest in you is a farce, Clara. He planned to seduce you, to make you cry off our engagement, solely to humiliate me before the ton. You are merely the bait in his trap." Harrington had left her there, shivering, despite the warmth of the glasshouse. The fragile hope that had blossomed in Clara's chest since the storm shattered into painful, jagged pieces. "Miss Vance." Clara flinched. Arthur stepped out from the shadows of the ferns, his handsome face lined with an uncharacteristic anxiety. He reached a hand towards her, but she recoiled as if burned. "Is it true?" Her voice broke, tears of humiliation burning her eyes. "Did you approach me merely to strike at Lord Harrington? Was it all a calculated plot for revenge?" Arthur froze. He could have lied. He could have easily spun a tale to deny Harrington's poison. But looking at the devastation in her proud, beautiful face, he knew he could not offer her anything less than the absolute truth. "Yes," he said, the word falling like a stone between them. "In the beginning, yes, I wanted to destroy him, and you were the weapon I chose." A ragged sob escaped Clara's lips. "How could you? You spoke to me of my captivity, yet you were building a cage of your own." "Clara, please," Arthur pleaded, stepping forward, entirely abandoning decorum as he caught her trembling hands in his. "That was before I knew you, before the storm in the park. When you spoke to me with such fierce bravery, the vengeance in my heart turned to ash. I realized I was becoming the very monster I sought to destroy. The man who plotted against you died that afternoon, I swear it. I care for nothing now but your freedom." She wrenched her hands away, her chest heaving, her eyes full of betrayed anguish. "I do not believe you, Your Grace. Leave me be." She fled the conservatory, leaving the most powerful duke in England standing alone in the shadows, his heart tearing completely in two. The heavy oak clock in Viscount Vance's study ticked ominously. It was 10 o'clock the following morning. Clara sat rigidly in a leather chair, her face as pale as parchment, whilst her father nervously adjusted his spectacles. Across the desk, Lord Harrington wore a triumphant, oily smile. The marriage articles lay between them, the inkwell open and a quill waiting. "If you would just sign here, my dear," Harrington purred, holding the feathered pen towards Clara, "and our futures shall be permanently bound." Clara reached out with a trembling hand, her vision blurring. She thought of her sisters, closed her eyes, and prepared to surrender her life. The heavy double doors of the study suddenly burst open with a violent crash. "Put the quill down, Miss Vance," a commanding voice thundered. The Duke of Blackwood strode into the room, sweeping past the bewildered butler. His presence seemed to consume the entire study. Thomas, his secretary, followed closely behind, carrying a thick leather portfolio. "Blackwood," Harrington shouted, leaping to his feet. "This is an outrage. You are trespassing upon private family business." "You no longer have any business here, Harrington," Arthur stated coldly. He did not look at Clara, focusing all his lethal, aristocratic wrath upon the man before him. Arthur snatched the portfolio from Thomas and threw it onto the Viscount's desk. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. Viscount Vance jumped. "Your Grace, what is the meaning of this?" "Those, Lord Vance, are your promissory notes," Arthur declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Every gambling debt, every mortgage upon your estate, every pound you owed to Lord Harrington's associates, I have purchased them all. The debt is no longer held by him." Harrington's face turned an ugly shade of puce. "You cannot do this. The betrothal is already agreed." Arthur took a step towards Harrington, his dark eyes burning with a dangerous, feral light. He lowered his voice so that only the men could hear the venom in it. "I have also spent the night reviewing your shipping ledgers, Harrington. I have irrefutable proof that you have been defrauding the Crown's naval investors. If you do not break off this engagement this very second, citing your own unworthiness to marry Viscount Vance's daughter, I shall deliver the evidence to the magistrate myself. You will trade this drawing room for a cell in Newgate." Harrington stood frozen, his arrogant facade crumbling into pure terror. He looked at the merciless Duke, realizing he had been utterly defeated. With a trembling hand, Harrington snatched his top hat from the side table. "The engagement is broken," Harrington choked out, humiliated and defeated. He spun on his heel and fled the room like a whipped dog. Silence descended upon the study. Arthur finally turned to look at Clara. She was staring at him, utterly stunned, the quill forgotten on the floor. He had ruined his own vengeance, exposed his heart, and spent a fortune, all for her. Without a single word, Arthur offered a stiff, formal bow and turned to walk out the door, believing he had lost the right to ask for anything more. 2 days after the dramatic dissolution of the engagement, rain once again battered the cobblestones of London. Arthur stood in the modest drawing-room of the Vance residence, his top hat in his hand, staring unblinkingly at the faded floral wallpaper. He felt entirely out of place, stripped of his usual arrogant armor. The door creaked open, and Clara entered. She wore a simple day dress of pale yellow, looking exhausted but undeniably relieved. A heavy, awkward silence stretched between them, thick with the weight of everything that had transpired. "Your Grace," she said softly, offering a shallow, formal curtsy. "Miss Vance," Arthur replied, his voice uncharacteristically gravelly. He stepped forward and placed a thick, leather-bound folder upon the tea table between them. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt this matter required my personal attendance." Clara looked at the folder, a flicker of apprehension in her brown eyes. "What is this?" "Your freedom," Arthur stated simply. "These are the promissory notes and the mortgage deeds pertaining to your father's estate. I have had my solicitors draft a legal transfer. The debts are no longer held by me, nor by any bank. They are entirely forgiven. The estate is secure, and your sister's dowries have been established in a trust. You owe no man anything, Miss Vance, least of all me." Clara stared at the leather folder as if it were a mirage. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingertips grazing the embossed leather. "You spent a fortune, Your Grace. You bought my family's ruin, only to erase it. Why would you do such a thing without demanding terms or repayment?" Arthur looked away, unable to bear the bewildered vulnerability in her gaze. It felt like a physical blow to his chest. "Because I brought my own darkness into your life, Clara," he confessed, the informal use of her name slipping out effortlessly. "I sought to use your plight to settle a bitter, ancient score. I blinded myself to your suffering until you forced me to see the truth in the park that day. This is merely my penance, a clumsy attempt to repair the damage my pride almost caused." He picked up his walking stick and bowed low, his expression an unreadable mask of solemnity. He had achieved his ultimate goal. She was safe, and Harrington was defeated, but the victory tasted like ash on his tongue because he was walking away empty-handed. "I shall not trouble you again, Miss Vance. I wish you a long, profoundly happy life. You are, at last, the master of your own fate." Arthur turned on his heel, his heavy boots sounding a death knell upon the wooden floorboards as he walked towards the door. He had his hand upon the cold brass doorknob when her voice cut through the quiet room. "Arthur, stop." The Duke froze. It was the first time she had spoken his Christian name, and the sound of it on her lips sent a violent tremor straight through his chest. He turned slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Clara was no longer looking at the leather folder. She had crossed the distance between them, stopping mere inches from where he stood. The guarded, cynical woman he had first observed at the Pembroke ball was entirely gone, replaced by someone radiant, fiercely brave, and breathtaking. "You are a terrifyingly foolish man, Your Grace," she whispered, her brown eyes shining with unshed tears. "You orchestrate the ruin of your greatest enemy, save my family from absolute destitution, secure my sister's futures, and grant me total independence. And yet you plan to simply walk out into the rain?" Arthur swallowed hard, his legendary composure unraveling completely under her intense gaze. "I lied to you, Clara. I approached you with cruelty in my heart. A gentleman does not expect to be forgiven for such a profound betrayal. I believed that by leaving, I was finally doing the honorable thing." A soft, incredulous laugh escaped her lips. She reached up, her ungloved hands gently framing his face. The warmth of her touch sent a shockwave through his entire body. "You were a scoundrel when we first met," she agreed softly, her thumbs brushing across his high cheekbones. "But the man who stood in my father's study and sacrificed his own vengeance to protect a woman he barely knew, that man is no scoundrel. That man is exactly the sort of protector I never dared hope to find." Arthur's breath hitched. He looked down into her eyes, searching for any trace of hesitation or fear, and found only absolute, unwavering certainty. The heavy, suffocating armor he had worn for 5 years finally shattered and fell away, leaving him completely bare. "Clara," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion he had long thought himself incapable of feeling. "I love you. I love you with a terrifying desperation. If you let me stay, I swear upon my life, I shall spend every waking moment endeavoring to be worthy of you." "Then stay," she whispered, rising onto her toes. Arthur did not hesitate. He swept his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him, and captured her lips in a kiss that tasted of rain, forgiveness, and overwhelming relief. It was not a kiss born of calculation or vengeance, but of a profound, consuming truth. The Duke of Blackwood had set out to ruin an enemy, but in the end it was his own dark heart that had been utterly and joyfully conquered. We have reached the conclusion of yet another journey, where love has once again triumphed over pride and adversity. Thank you ever so much for gracing me with your time, and for embarking upon this adventure with me to the very last word. If today's tale was to your liking, I would be immensely grateful if you would leave a like to support our endeavors, allowing this romance to capture new hearts. I also warmly invite you to subscribe to the channel, becoming a cherished member of our society of enchanting stories. May romance continue to inspire your days. A toast to great loves, and until we meet again,